This is the Mooncast.
All right, Bruce, man, welcome to the Mooncast, man.
Hello, Vandros. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate you so much, man, for coming on. Is that a piano in the background?
That is a virtual background from
Oh,
streaming.
okay.
But I do play the piano. I am a musician. So yes, I have a piano, but it's not that pretty.
Okay.
Now it's just one of those electronic pianos.
Okay. Nice. Can you introduce yourself a little bit to the audience? Let them know who you are, what you're about.
Yeah, my name is Bruce Chamoff. I am probably one of the most ambitious creative people I know. And I own the World Podcast Network. I'm a musician. I'm a dad, but my daughter just moved out of the house. So I'm technically not a dad that way anymore. But yeah, everything's great. So I've always been, I built websites for 27 years. And now just trying to make podcasters successful, one show at a time.
Amazing, man. What inspired you to start the World Podcast Network? So I think you're the first World Podcast Network, correct?
I am the first. I'm the person who actually coined the term podcast network back in 2006. In a nutshell, I wanted to be a DJ when I was in college. Mm-hmm. They didn't have any more room for DJs, so every slot was filled up. And I went through college without that particular goal. When I graduated college, I had my degree in marketing and just working. I got into web development. And then in 2005, when podcasting started becoming podcasting and there were more shows around, I had my show. I was promoting my own music. And I decided, maybe I should have a podcast of itself so I can promote other unsigned bands. And I did that. It was very successful. And then I'm like, you know what? I am an entrepreneur. I like to build web applications. Why don't I build a network of podcasts and make it act like a radio network or a TV network? And that's where the term podcast network came from. And that was literally about 6 months after I started podcasting in early 2006. Mm-hmm. And I just started building it up as we went along. I mean, we had 20 podcasts at the time. Now we have over 1,000. So wow. That's how the idea came.
Man, that's amazing. What were some of the challenges that you faced, while you were trying to build up this podcast network over the years?
Well, definitely social media marketing. I mean, social media has grown. When I started the podcast network, Facebook was not around. TikTok was not around. Twitter wasn't around. I mean, the social media, I don't even know if we had Web 2.0 at that point. I don't even know what year Web 2.0 actually was basically in effect. But I think social media grew about 2 years later. So I really had Google search engine optimization to rely on. And it was just a matter of taking everybody's episode that they were publishing and making that a separate page so that Google would pick it up and start indexing us. And before I knew it, people were joining. And I'm like, where are these people coming from? And then they got viewers. My Google Analytics was showing, I was on Long Island, right, which is right by New York City, but I was getting traffic from Texas, from the UK. Wow. So I was doing something right.
Yeah. That's amazing, man. Because you're also one of the first people to get on Fiverr too, as well, right?
Yeah, back in 2011.
Wow. Like, can you walk me through how that process was for you to first be like one of the first initial people to use Fiverr and how you leveraged that to help grow the World Podcast Network?
Yeah, absolutely. My wife at the time, she saw, now in New York, everybody has NBC. So she was watching NBC. And when Fiverr just got launched, they did a promo, I guess, on all the major networks. And she told me, she said, I just saw something on the news where you can make money. You can make $5, and it was only $5 back then. There was no other amount of money that anybody could pay or charge. You can make $5 for doing whatever, right? I go on there. I'm like, this is really cool. I mean, people had so many different what they call gigs on Fiverr, and Fiverr actually was the first gig economy website. So I'm like, okay, but what am I going to do for $5? And how am I going to become rich for $5? How am I going to make a living on $5? But I went on there anyway. And it just so happens that I had attended the social media, some kind of social media marketing conference in New York City. And I figured maybe my first gig should be that I published my notes and I sold my notes. And I sold that by the hundreds. Okay, that was my first Fiverr gig. I was amazed as to how successful that was. I mean, they were really an up and coming, at that time, they were an up and coming business platform. And they had, I think they had angel investor funding for like $15 million. So they were really a serious company when they first launched in 2011. A lot of people don't know this about Fiverr, but they're headquartered in Tel Aviv. So they're basically an Israeli company.
Wow.
But so they're really, I mean, they've done so well. And then at that point, I had another gig where, because I was building websites, I would actually analyze people's websites, okay, for $5. And that also grew by the hundreds. Like I was amazed as to how much I was getting. And that, Fiverr at that point they weren't that competitive. There weren't that many sellers. It was easy to break through and penetrate the market. And that's what happened. But then they opened up the floodgates a couple of years later, and it became very competitive, but they also allowed you to make more money than just $5. I will say also that they had, I think 2013, they had what's called V2, and they sent a photographer to my house, and they took a picture of me and my daughter when my daughter was little, of us actually, like they put us on the top of the technology page on Fiverr. Like I was amazed. So that was really cool. And then 2015, I became the first chairman of their community team in New York. So I've been very involved, not just as a seller, but in the community as well.
Wow, that's amazing. And when you talked about social media, right? And the impact of how it sort of helped to revolutionize your World Podcast Network. And
Right.
can you talk a little bit about what do you think currently in 2023 is the best form of marketing versus what it was back then specifically? Like, how were you marketing? Were you using blogs back then, or what was the differences and nuances between back then when you first started to now in 2023?
Yeah, I definitely was using blogs, and when blogs back then, when they were being written by real people, and not today like AI tools are doing. I did some blogging. I mean, search engine optimization was absolutely still, in my opinion, the number one way to market yourself, and of course, that was always challenging because SEO back then is not like it is now. I mean, you had to get on the first page of Google, and you had to get within the first 5 slots, or people just were not going to click on you, right? I mean, people are very lazy. So you want to get up to the very top to make people do as little work as possible to find you. Social media marketing is great, but what I find is that people do it incorrectly, right? Anybody who just posts on Facebook, they call themselves a social media marketer. That's not what social media is about. It's like, Okay. I can go on Twitter and I can add a tweet every single day or 3 times a day. That doesn't make me an expert social media marketing, right? You need to know, what people forget is that social media marketing is still marketing. That's my college degree, right? It's not just about posting on Facebook or tweeting. You need to know who your audience is. You need to know the target, right? You need to understand demographics. Like, who are you marketing to? Who is your target market, right? Are you marketing to senior citizens who are over the age of 60 years old, or are you marketing to teens? And then when you do that, you need to know what social network is your target market mostly frequency, like where are they? And that's the social network that you focus on. Like, you don't just go, TikTok and Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Pinterest, You also have to know the psychographics, right? Psychographics is what's the lifestyle of your target market, right? And if you can figure out the lifestyle, then you'll do very well reaching your potential audience, right? Psychographics basically is what type of lifestyle do people have? Are they gay? Are they straight? Are they into football? Are they into cooking? Right?
Mm.
Do they love to travel? If they love to travel, what countries do they love to go to? And then that's where you actually market. That's how you market yourself. Otherwise, you'll never be able to reach anybody. that I found
Mm.
that out the hard way too. So
Yeah, for sure. I think that it's very, very nuanced because I think a lot of people are thinking that maybe they could spam the algorithm by just posting in abundance every day. But like you
doesn't
said, with
work that way.
no, yeah, yeah, no real plan, you know? And so your mentality is more so to take the narrow approach of where you're just kind of, okay, these people are mainly, my audience mainly resides on YouTube per se.
Right.
And so you're just going to mainly just focus, okay, on YouTube as opposed to, okay, let's just blast out content in every single platform and then let's hope for the best. So, yeah, I think it's a very, very good strategy to have. I wanted to ask you about some of the main pain points that you see with podcasters currently, and how do you think it can be rectified when you're starting a podcast?
Sure. Well, the two biggest pain points that always, and basically everybody comes to me with all of the questions, but I get the same questions every single time. And that is, they are, how do I monetize my podcast and how do I grow it? That
Mm,
those pain points are always the two that almost every podcaster who doesn't consider themselves successful faces. And I always tell people the same thing. The pain point for growth and monetization they're both the same. And you have to grow your show before you even think about monetizing,
mm-hmm.
right? Because if
Yeah.
you don't grow your show, how are you going to make money? Well, who are you going to sell to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is always the first pain point that you need to address, and that could come in a lot of forms. I mean, podcasting is it's a digital broadcast. That's all it is. Like, when you ask any podcaster the definition of podcasting, they will give you a long-winded 10-minute definition. Right? It's
Mm-hmm.
very simple. Podcasting, in two words, like again, is a digital broadcast. Now, and that's all it is. I mean, everything else, it's just kind of fluff inside the definition. But
Yeah.
when you want to grow your podcast, again, you need to know who your target market is, right? If you're a health podcast,
Mm-hmm.
you can't just say I'm a health podcaster, right? You need to
Mm-hmm.
focus on something in the health area, right? Is your podcast dedicated to preventing cancer or diabetes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you an exercise guru and you want to help people eat right, and obviously exercise and become healthier? So
Mm-hmm.
that once you figure out what your podcast actually is about from a more detailed level, then you think about how to actually grow your podcast. And again, what social network or what social media are your podcasters actually going to be on? And you
Mm-hmm.
focus on that one, right? And then once you do that, then you also have to figure out, okay, what types of posts am I going to post? What are my podcast episodes going to be about to get people
Mm-hmm.
to retain my podcast in their list of favorites, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's,
Yeah.
and that's really important. I mean, you also have to think about, what is the format of my episode? Am I going to play music? Am I going to just talk? And you have to also realize that all talk podcasts get boring very, very fast,
Mm.
right? I always tell podcasters, don't just talk, because talk gets boring.
Mm.
Break it up every 5 or 10 minutes with a song. And that's why on my
Mm.
podcast, on the World Podcast Network, we have we have Pod Safe music. These are artists that have actually paid us to list their music, that they won't sue you for copyright infringement because they want to be played. Right. So that's,
Mm.
break it up that way. And then also do something like ask your audience for a question, and then post that question somewhere on social media and have people answer it, and then read the questions online. So
Mm.
as long as you do that, you will retain your audience, you'll grow faster. And I tell podcasters, the other pain point is that when you have about 50 people in your audience, then it's time to start monetizing.
Okay.
Okay. And
Okay.
those are the two pain points.
Yeah. Yeah. Why the number 50?
Because 50 is where you could start really, like if you sell something, and you have to think about the percentage as well. I always think about 5% of my audience, right? So I always think about, if I can engage 5% of my audience, which at that point would be 2 or 3 people, then you have sales. You have basically a sales funnel that you can start putting into your podcast. Obviously, if you go higher than 50, the more the merrier,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But
Of
you
course.
only need about 2 to 3 people to start buying your products. And then once they buy your products, they start reviewing it, and then you get more customers that way. So think about
Okay.
it that way. Yeah. That's how I
Yeah.
do it.
And do you think social media is the only way for growth, or is there any other outlets you could think of in terms of funnels and things of this nature to repurpose content and things of this nature?
Oh, no, definitely not. I mean, social media is one way to go. And like I said, it doesn't always work because people just don't market themselves on social media right. You need a really good, trained, experienced social media marketer, right? So instead of that, you can do blogs, right? But I'm also going to tell people, if you're going to blog, blogging takes a very big commitment. You have to blog at least once a week, and then you'll get Google rankings. And please stop using AI to write your blog posts. Google is cracking down on that. Google is not going to index any articles that are done with AI. And you know what? I think that people will run into a dead end with AI. I mean, yes, AI is great, okay, but it's taking jobs away, right? So I think that you need to write an original piece of material and content, right? Because eventually you're going to get about 10 people putting out the same type of article because they got the same AI results. That's how I look at it,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense, but I would say this in regards to AI, because you made a point, you mentioned about AI, but the fertility rates are going down, and the labor force is having a decrease in amount of people there within the labor force,
Right.
and an increase in supply. So I think AI sort of subsidizes that gap in between both, and there's not as much skilled workers. All the Generation Z, the Zoomers, they all want to be on. They all want to be content creators, and I think that for a lot of jobs that actually require a high level of skill, high level of expertise, it's missing. So I think AI could serve as a form to subsidize that. But I don't know what you think about that specifically.
No, I think AI has a lot of practical uses, but I don't think that it should be the endpoint for writing content, because then you're
Okay.
basically taking your own personal creativity away. I mean, I would love to do that. I mean, honestly, I actually just paid somebody to write me 50. This is what I did with Chat GTP. So I went there and I said, I would like 50 blog post titles on how podcasters can grow. I got that list. Then I gave it to one of my guys on my team member. And I said, look, I would like you to run 50 blog posts through all of these titles. Just put the title into Chat GTP one at a time. And I got it back, and it's great. Then I started reading them, and I'm like, wait a minute. This was written definitely not with my own writing style.
Yes.
Right. And that alone just kind of turned me off to using AI. I mean, it was kind of an experiment, and I was going to do it. And then I realized, but not only is it taking my creativity away, but what am I going to do if Google decides to crack down on this? And they'll start penalizing us, and then you lose your podcast. You lose your Google rankings. So I don't think. I mean, I think if you want to use AI to give you ideas, and then you need to spend time to rewrite what AI is giving you because it gives you the ideas, right? But
Yeah.
definitely blog posts are good because you get great search engine optimization with that, and you get to the top of Google. That would be wonderful. Definitely live events.
Yeah.
Right? You make money when people think that you are an expert, because when they think you're an expert, they start trusting you.
Yeah.
But I always tell people, don't call yourself an expert. That doesn't mean anything. Let other people call you an expert. Like I meet people all the time and say, I'm an expert in this and I'm an expert. You're not an expert until I tell you you're an expert. You know what I mean? Because I'm not going to believe you. Everybody says I'm an expert. I'm an expert. I'm great. I'm a professional. Great. Okay.
Yeah.
But just because you think you're an expert, that's like a website or a store saying, "Oh, we were rated number one." Well, who rated you number one? You?
Yeah, they always do that,
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I never tell people I'm the best. I never tell people I'm an expert, and I never tell people I'm in number one. Like I don't like those superlatives, but we are truly the first podcast network in the world, and that I can say with certainty. And I'm definitely the person in the world that created the podcast network, but I'm definitely not the best, and I'll never tell you that. Okay, so that's but what you do is you start having live events. And those live events, you can have other speakers or you can be the main speaker. And then you start telling people, if you would like to retain my services, here's my contact information. And then just leave it alone. You got the expertise out there. Now let people make their own conclusions. But what you have to do, like you said, is what are the pain points, right? If you can address the pain points in your live events or your blog posts, you'll go very far.
Yeah, but I kind of think, doesn't it depend on where your demographic that's mainly listening to your podcast is? Let's say it's mainly UK listeners and you're in the US. I mean, are you going to have time? Because usually people are doing podcasting part-time when, as a funnel for their actual business or to grow their personal brand. So you're not usually going to have time to okay, I'm just going to fly to UK on for an entire 2, 3, 4, 5 days or whatever and fly back, to do some live events. So I think it depends on that too. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're talking about a different area of the world also, you have to understand too that people don't always identify with somebody who's not speaking your same accent.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, I have a New York accent and New Yorkers have very distinct accents, right? You got Long Island, you got Staten Island. I mean, you could probably hear it right now in my accent. And when I sing on my music, people tell me they hear my New York accent in my songs, right? And then now I'm going to go to the UK and I'm going to talk to people who speak with a British accent in my New York accent. It's going to, you know what I mean? It's like, you're not always going to get people's attention that way because accents are very difficult. I mean, they suggested, I was invited to come speak in Ireland and I'm like, that's great. I would love to go to Ireland, but are they going to understand me? Because I can't understand anybody when they speak an Irish accent. So So if I can't understand somebody who speaks with an Irish accent, are they going to understand me when I'm speaking with an American or a New York accent? You got to look at it that way. I mean, I'm not saying that's kind of a minor demographic change, but yeah, I mean, if I could speak to people who look like me, who have the same makeup as me, yeah, that would be great. I'm going to identify with them. And that's it.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. But I want to go back a little bit because when you're talking about AI, don't you think that as the mechanisms compound in regards to the intellectual capacity and the retention of information, as that continues to compound over the course of time, the AI as a subsequent event gets better over the course of time. So it will be able to create newly made blogs or freshly newly made ideas. And it has the ability already to dream and create ideas from scratch, and so it's taking away a little bit of the creator economy of the graphic designers and fashion designers and so on and so forth. So don't you think over that course of time that as it gets better, people will be able to leverage it more for blog posts and other sort of miscellaneous tasks and so on?
I mean, I do. I think that AI already is growing. I mean, it's everywhere now, and it has grown so fast. And I also believe that if you invest in stocks, the stock market is going to start having a lot of AI companies listed on the stock exchanges as well, because that's just where the next phase of technology is. We're not headed towards AI. We are already in AI because you can see that everywhere. I mean, Chat GTP is obviously the biggest AI platform, but there are so many more. I mean, I own the biggest LinkedIn group for podcasters as well. And there
Mm.
are all these companies coming on now and saying, hey, we got this AI tool, we got that AI tool, and that AI tool will make your podcast better and you could do things faster. And I think I could feel it, like I could see it, but definitely it's not. See, the biggest concern also about AI is that people are going to lose their jobs. And we just went out with a friend of mine the other night. He told me that his coworker just lost her job and she is blaming it on AI. And I asked him, I said, but where is AI in your company? He said, I don't know. Then how does your ex-coworker know that she lost her job because of AI? But that alone just was a wake-up call. And I'm thinking, this will happen. It's not if, it's when. And when you got you're going to have social media marketing done by AI. That I could see.
Yes,
Right?
absolutely.
I mean, you could
It's
just
already
say,
happening.
yeah, it's already happening. You could say, Canva does it now. And Canva has I love Canva. Okay. I've designed over 100 designs on Canva for my business, for the podcast network. And they now have a whole suite of AI tools. Right. The thing with Canva is that now they have social scheduling. And you can say, I would like to write 5 Facebook posts with this image, write it for me, and then it spits it out. And then you can automatically schedule it right through Canva. Now
Yeah,
that
it's
I
the same.
believe is great. Yeah, that's a great use of AI.
Hey bro, I'm Just Trolling is something that will not just challenge your perspective, but also touch your heart and soul. It's a book that defies convention, blending art and literature into a thought-provoking masterpiece. A reflective piece of provocative art that tackles societal constructs from angles you've never considered. Hey bro, I'm Just Trolling delves into the very essence of our existence. It questions the technology that surrounds us, challenges our notions of beauty, stares unflinchingly into the eyes of death, and questions the boundaries of freedom. It scrutinized the educational system that molds our very future. This book is a journey, an exploration of shared human experience, and it's a work of art that refuses to be confined by tradition. It's a canvas painted with words, a melody of thought, and a testament to the power of creativity in a world dominated by algorithms and data. Visit moonboycapitalventures.com and get your hands on Hey Bro, I'm Just Trolling today. It's not just a book, it's a movement. Now let's jump back into the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I look at, for instance, like there's tools like Opus where you could take your entire podcast, you can punch it into Opus and then it'll just make shorts for you. Like 100 shorts or 1,000 shorts, how many shorts you have depending on how long your podcast is. And then you can just copy and paste them or upload them into YouTube or into TikTok. And then that solves your problem with subtitles and it knows exactly already what the SEO should be. So imagine like how much easier it's going to be able to streamline that process too as well. And also, I'm also in the same way of thinking as you are in regards to AI because I'm leveraging that too as well and adding that as an implementation within my startup that I'm building too as well. So because I see where it's going and also I see solutions that can be solved within the podcast niche for what I'm building, the listenable and everything. So I'm also looking to capitalize on that and also to attract more investors as well as to raise more capital to, sort of get my market branding and positioning right into the time frame before AI really takes off, so I can be seen as market leader, within that niche of podcasting, because I don't think there's a lot of people that are really doing so much for podcast AI solutions and with ebooks and things of this nature and switching and reversing and audiobooks. So I'm looking to solve that problem. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the KPIs that you look at specifically for podcasters, because I know you help podcasters, grow and stuff like that. And what would you say the main KPIs are that they should be looking at? Should it be retention of the amount of time? Like, what's the average retention? Say you have an hour-long podcast. What would be then the average retention percentage? Would it be 2%, 3%, 5%? Can you just break that down a little bit in KPIs?
I always think that 5 to 10%, which is pretty high, is
Mhm.
still a fair retention rate.
Yeah.
And like I said before, it's not just about the retention rate, but it's also, and those KPIs are really good measurement tools. Podcasters first have to figure out how are they going to retain, before they think about the percentage, those subscribers, right? And I always say that you have to engage people. And if you can engage people, those KPIs will automatically be higher. That retention rate will automatically drop and rise or drop depending on, and I got to say flat out, how boring or how exciting your podcast is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I listen to 5 to 7 episodes a day because I run the largest podcast network in the world. It's part of my job. It's part of my promise to podcasters. And I do it because this is my passion, is to help podcasters grow. But I can say that, and I will never mention names ever,
Yeah.
but I'll
Yeah.
say that I know the podcasts that are retaining their audiences because you can hear it in their voices that they tell they tell their audience, click over here, go over there, go to this website, or like us on this social network. Or if you would love this product, check out our website. We're going to put it in the show notes. And then you will retain people more, right? I always tell people you need to work those show notes. And in my own podcast, that's one of my biggest episodes, like my most popular episodes, is the one on where you can construct really good show notes. And I always hear podcasters say, subscribe, like, review. I mean, YouTube does that all, like YouTubers do that all the time, and they do a great job on it. Video content creators and video podcasters do a great job of saying, like us, subscribe, hit the bell, right? Podcasters don't do that. And they often don't keep their subscribers because, like YouTube, there are millions of podcasts out there. So you want, again, to answer your question, I would say 5 to 10%, but then podcasters have to earn that by engaging their audiences. And that's my advice.
Yeah. I was looking at a stat the other day about, I think it said that something along the lines of 1% of podcasters make it past episode 20. And there's roughly around, on estimated, 4 million podcasts. So that means that there's only 40,000 roughly podcasts that make it past episode 20, which means if you made it past episode 20, that would already put you in the top 1%.
I guess.
Yeah.
I see that too on the podcast network.
Yeah.
And I can tell you because we take everybody's RSS feeds and we show the episodes right through them. So I know right away that on the World Podcast Network, we have an algorithm that will allow us to see which podcasts are the most active on our own network. And I see the same 25 podcasts all the time. Sometimes you'll see, and this actually irks me, but I can understand why. So you'll see the same podcast putting out 4 episodes a day. I think that's overkill. I think that your audience can only handle one episode at least a couple of days apart because they're going to be listening to other podcasts. So I look at, like, our algorithm will every hour, it will publish the newest episodes of about 50 podcasts, right? So it takes 50 podcasts in our index, goes out, gets all their episodes, and then the next hour goes out and gets the next 50. So this way we never stay stagnant or stale throughout the day, right? But I sometimes will look at the homepage of our network and I see the same podcast coming out like every hour, and it's a different episode. And I'm like, you don't need to do that. Like, spread it out. So I think that's kind of the way to do it. But I mean, however you want to do it, just stay engaged, keep your audience engaged, and you'll do well.
Yeah. When because I don't know if you had a chance. Have you had a chance to look at my podcast?
I have. I listened to Moon Boy, the Mooncast.
The Mooncast. Because I like to be super honest and everything like that. So just for transparency, when you listen to my podcast, what are some critiques that you can give, or some feedback that you can give for me specifically, so that I could improve my podcast? And what are things that you like, don't like, stuff like that? That would be interesting actually for me to know.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I've listened to 2 of your episodes, and first of all, I'll say you have a great production,
Oh, thank
right?
you, man.
You do have a lot of podcasts that we have on our
Hmm.
network are not the best production. You have a really good sound coming through. I would say, and this is kind of my problem too, and you could probably hear it now, is cut the echo down. And I'm I'm saying that from a what's the word I'm looking for? I'm saying that from a hypocritical point of view, because I also have a lot of echo back here too.
Yeah, yeah.
And I do have the foam that I put on the walls, but I need to put more. Like I don't have enough of it, because
Yeah.
echoes do sound, they don't sound great. And
Mm.
what I realize is when you're talking on your microphone, and I can see it right now in the video, try to
Mm.
get closer to the microphone,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
I'm working on that. I'm trying to get another mic that's a little bit closer. That is one critique I've been told to as well. But yeah, I appreciate that. It's good to get feedback on that. But I am gonna fix it. I'm working on it. So thank you so much for the feedback.
Yeah, and that's great. That's no problem. I mean, and also, like try to come out. I think your episodes could, I mean, I tell this to everybody, come
mm,
out with episodes that the titles themselves are more engaging.
yeah.
The one thing I see is, actually, let me go back to, I'm going to go to actually your podcast on the network. So
Mhm.
let's do that.
Yeah.
And I'm going
Yeah.
to look, I'll tell you what I noticed here. And let's
Hmm.
see, it's got to find you. I'm going to search for you now.
Yeah.
Because we got like a million, we got like over 1,000 podcasts now. So it's,
Yeah, man, you guys are growing, man. It's great.
thank you. Yeah.
Really, really
So
good.
the one thing I'm going to, and like I told you before, search engine optimization, right? You want to
Yes.
get good, like you want your episodes to get Google rankings. Everybody talks about my website, my website. I won't get my website on the first page of Google, but
Hmm.
podcasters need to also get good rankings on Google for their episodes. So the one thing
Hmm.
that I do notice is you put, and a lot of podcasters do this, you put the Mooncast in the beginning of the episode title,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
The thing is that people who don't know the Mooncast won't search Google for the Mooncast because they don't know it exists. So,
Mm.
and the other thing too is that Google will only show the first 65 characters of anything in the title tags of the HTML, right? So for somebody that hasn't really, like, the Mooncast is not really a household word like Google, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
Microsoft. So I would also suggest putting the Mooncast at the very end of
Mm.
your episode. And then also, I tell people this: you have really good guests on your show, but
Hmm.
if they're not really famous guests, then they also don't have to be in the beginning of the episode, because unless you have somebody
Mm.
like, let's say you have Taylor Swift, okay, you
Okay.
have, let's say you have somebody that famous, you have the band, you have AC/DC, you have some musical group. You don't really need to put that guest name in the beginning because someone's never really heard of them. I would say my suggestion is that your episode title, as you mentioned, should address a pain
Mm.
point. The pain point should be
Mm.
right there. And you do something really cool, but you don't do it consistently. The episode number should also be at the end, like episode 36, right? With
Mm.
Eric Annan is at the end. That's great, right? But now episode 35 is in the beginning. But that won't get
Mm.
people clicking on Google.
Yeah, yeah, I got that from you. The LinkedIn post that you did, I followed up on that because I was like,
Yeah,
he's right. There's too much real estate at the beginning, and so the very next episode with Eric Anand, I put it at the end, and I took out the Mooncast because so I can have more real estate for
right.
SEO and stuff like that. So yeah, it was great advice, man. So I really appreciate that a lot. Just
Thanks. I
taking in
mean,
your feedback.
yeah, thank you. Your episode 36 doesn't even say the Mooncast. And I think
Mhm.
you can put the Mooncast, just don't put it in the beginning. Unless of course you are in that top 1% of the podcast and people know your podcast without even Googling it. At that point, they're just going to Google it anyway. But at this point, you haven't, most podcasts have not established that level of search engine optimization or rankings on Google. So you want to put more generic phrases for your episode titles that people will Google, they'll Google and they'll search.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. Yeah, this is great breakdown, man. Thank you so much for that, Bruce. And
thank you.
I wanted to shift over because I wanted to just a little bit piggyback off of the point, because you said that out of the over 1,000 podcasts that you have in a network, around 25 of them are consistent.
Right.
Wow, that's a super low conversion.
Very low.
Yeah, it's what 2.5%, something like that.
Something like that. But you know what? That 2.5%, they're very engaged because we also collect data and we also present analytics. So I know by looking at the data that they do get a lot of downloads from our podcast network. And, you got to also consider we do our best to promote podcasts because that's our job. But podcasters have to do their part and they have to put out episodes more often. And I say, my podcast is, I don't really follow my own advice. And I get that. I don't put out episodes every week because I'm so busy with just helping everybody else. Like I'm like a shoemaker without the shoes. But I find it very rewarding when I see that the fruits of my labor has helped the podcast grow. And, I own the network. I can promote it anywhere I want. But I'm not going to do that. I do want to be fair to everybody that's on the network. People know that they can actually listen to my podcast. I know I have it. And people always ask me all the time, when are you going to put out your next episode? I'm like, I will. I just recorded it. Now I got to edit it. And it's just not my top priority of doing it because I still answer people's questions anyway. But I think most podcasts that put out episodes every week are the ones that are always going to do well because people expect that. And when you meet their expectations, you do better, you perform better.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at how it was back then when you were uploading podcasts versus how it is now, because people were mainly uploading them on iTunes, or what were they uploading it on back then? I was super young, Bruce. I was like a young teen. So you could probably attest to this more than me.
It was it Apple? I don't think it was Apple yet. Apple was not available as a podcast platform. They were, when the iPod came out, I don't believe Apple was actually like they had the iPod, but people use the iPod strictly for music, right? And you can walk around. I mean, the big thing is you can walk around with literally 1,000 CDs in your pocket with just one little white piece of technology, and podcasting wasn't there yet, right? I think that I don't know the exact year, but I believe that iTunes started allowing podcasters to market themselves like 2007 or 2008, like right around when Facebook came out. So I think that they weren't doing that yet, right? At that point. So where they were uploading I think Libsyn was the biggest platform at that point, right? We didn't have Anchor. We didn't have Buzzsprout yet back then. I don't believe we even had Podbean. So I think it was Libsyn dominated the podcast hosting platform or the industry at that point. There was one more. I can't remember. I don't think they're around anymore. And Libsyn got better, and then of course everybody else started following as well. I believe Apple came in like around 2007.
Yeah. Well, what makes you think? Why is the most of the listeners on Spotify? Like, how do you think that they separate themselves so much from all the other podcast hosting platforms?
Well, I believe that first of all, Spotify and Apple are neck and neck. I think they're both tied for number one for different reasons, right? Spotify obviously started out exactly like the iPod did, right? It was supporting music, and Spotify has opened up a platform for. I think they market themselves much better for unsigned artists and band and music. As well as, Apple came later. I think SoundCloud came about around the same time as Spotify did, but SoundCloud's also a big player in this as well. And I think that Spotify, because they literally changed the game. I mean, they literally changed it. Nobody else changed it like Spotify did. And the reason is because, I mean, do you get Netflix where you're located?
Yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, so if you watch Netflix a couple of months ago had an 8 episode a show, a series on Spotify, and how they started and how their founders were going against technology, right? They want a platform, or they wanted a platform where when you hit the play button, it's not going to stream. It's not going to take like 10 seconds to stream. It's going to stream within like a split second. And it just goes through the whole thing where it goes through the whole thing where they were pressing their developers to go past any number of seconds when the actual song would stream, would download, and then you have to wait for it. They accomplished it. And I believe that Spotify, by doing that, they're the best instant gratification platform where you hit the play button and you hear the music right away, and you don't have to say, oh my gosh, when am I going to hear this? When's it going to download? Right? Apple also did that too, right? But Spotify did that. And of course, when they started Anchor, they now started competing with platforms like LinkedIn. So that's why they're the best. Now, SoundCloud is another popular platform for podcasters, but I don't think they're that great. Like, I think they're good for music, but they're not good as a platform. So they just don't support podcasters like they should.
Yeah, I think that also they have an issue. I remember I tried to get my podcast uploaded on SoundCloud, and they said I had to basically upload each episode by episode. I couldn't copy the RSS feed and then just move it over. So it wasn't interoperable with all the other hosting platforms, which made it inconvenient for me to want to upload.
Yeah, but they'll give you an RSS feed. Yeah, but I know what you're saying. You want to be able to input an RSS feed so you can just do it in one fell swoop. Yeah,
exactly. I get it. Yeah. So that's a little bit of a disadvantage, I guess, for sure. And also, I wanted to ask you about skills, and what skills do you think? Because for someone who thinks that they could be a podcaster or is thinking about potentially starting a podcast, what would you say are the main skills you need to be a podcaster?
Well, I mean, I don't think podcasting takes a lot of skills, but I do believe that if you are a podcaster, you do have to be comfortable with your own voice, right? That is for sure. People always tell me, oh, I don't want to become a podcaster. I don't like my voice, or I'm not a good public speaker. Okay, well, if you don't have confidence, that probably to me has got to be the number one skill, right? And confidence is a skill. People don't think of it like, everybody thinks that, I could play baseball and football and soccer. That's a skill, right? I can program websites. That's a skill. No, confidence is also a skill. So you need that skill in order to be a podcaster, because you have to be comfortable with your own voice. And I can't tell you how many podcasters have told me, oh, I don't like my voice, so I only put out like one episode a month. I'm sorry, you're not going to succeed that way. You're definitely not going to succeed that way. You're not going to grow your audience. And by the time you put out that one episode, 1 week later, your audience has already forgotten about you and they moved on to another podcast. So that is a skill. And honestly, I just think you need patience. Podcasting takes patience. You got to edit it, right? You got to make sure it sounds good. You got to distribute it. You got to write up the show notes. And I believe that's it. I don't think there's any other skill really needed for podcasting.
Yeah. In regards to bringing on guests, do you think that it's the best strategy for everyone, or do you think it's dependent on what kind of niche you're in, or how do you see that in regards to guests?
I think that podcasts should alternate between guests and between all hosts and no guests. The reason why I say that is because you are the host of your own show. Whoever you are, whatever podcast you have, people are hearing your voice because you're basically telling people that you're the host, right? Yeah. And I mean, I have on my show, sometimes I do it all by myself. Sometimes I do it with my partner, Shari. And sometimes I have a host, a guest, and it's really cool. Every once in a while, I have a co-host, and the co-host is basically another guest, but I'm not really interviewing them. I'm just saying, hey, you take over the microphone.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that all all guest podcasts, I think that they're good, but you have to have people also who are famous,
Mm.
right?
Yeah. Well,
Otherwise, yeah. Sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
For my specific niche, because I deal mainly with Web3 technology, business investing. So I try to bring on guests that are experts within their vertical integration of their business. So I think that they are semi, I guess, famous. Some of them, some of them have a large following, like I guess on LinkedIn or on YouTube or so on. So I don't know what you think about that. If they're semi, like 20 to 30,000 followers, I think it's not really famous, but because yeah, I'm trying to basically allude to the fact that you said earlier about not having to put the name, as it's just taking up real estate within the title. But I kind of feel like it maybe brings a little bit more credibility to the podcast. But I don't know what you think about that specifically.
I feel that, yes, you do have a good point.
Hmm.
And if they're semi-famous, yeah, that's great. I mean, I would also say that if you do have a guest, and I say this to every podcaster, if you have a guest, tell that guest to tell people about your show and that they are on it so that you will also leverage their audience as well. That's if they especially like you said, Vandros, if they have 20, 30,000 different followers, right? That is a great chunk of people to listen to your podcast.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think it's good. And yeah, I mean, if they have a good following, I say definitely, I mean, put them in the show notes. But like you said before, the question is, what is the pain point that the podcast itself is addressing? Because that is what is going to get people to engage, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I mean, my name is Bruce Chamoff, right? Most people do not know me. So if you put down in your episode title, oh, I got Bruce Chamoff as a guest, and I would love if you did, um,
Yeah.
people won't know who I am. And if you put the pain point after it, they might not see that because Google might not show that in the search results. So you want to always put the pain point that even the guest is going to address. And then you
Hmm.
say, okay, like in your point, you said, you do Web3, cryptocurrency. So a good topic would be, how do I buy one Bitcoin when I can't afford one Bitcoin? And then you say
Hmm.
with that guest, right? And then
Mm.
this way,
Yeah.
this way, people who are actually Googling that question, your episode title might come up in number one on Google.
Mm. Okay. Yeah. Makes absolute sense. Do you know how the algorithm works for Spotify specifically?
I don't, because like Google, they won't tell you. But
Mm.
I will say this, that I know, because Spotify, their whole backbone for podcasts is Anchor. I mean, it always was.
Mhm.
And you have to always look at your Anchor, the analytics, right? And look at, the most important thing is, what is your most popular episode? And then make more episodes like
Mhm.
that. Beat that topic to death, because my biggest episode is, how do you become an influencer through your podcast? And I got thousands
Mm.
of downloads for that. And that's my biggest one. And that's like 2 years, like 2 years ago when I first started the podcast. So
Mhm.
look at that. And then if you can build off of those most engaging episodes, Spotify will award you, because Spotify also, like I said, those analytics are exactly like Anchor's, because it's the same company. So they'll show
Mhm.
you higher up in search results.
Mm. Wow. Okay. Yeah, it makes absolute sense. And what about the length of the podcast? Because yeah, okay, the ideal is once a week.
Mhm.
Okay, should it be 30 minutes? Should it be an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours? What would you suggest?
I suggest 30 minutes tops, maybe 45. And if your episode goes over 30 minutes, you could do a part 1 and 2. And
Mm.
I was just speaking to Jody Krangle from the uh, audio branding podcast, and she's a really good podcaster. Her whole thing is about voiceover and projecting your voice and everything. And she always has hour-long podcasts where she breaks them up into part 1 and 2.
Mm.
So, because I think that after 30 minutes, people will start getting bored. I mean, I mean, I'm not telling people don't have 60-minute podcasts, right? But you
Mm.
do have to know how long is your audience going to actually stand by and listen to that for a whole 60 minutes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's
No,
the
yeah.
question.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. Yeah, and if you're doing it like let's say 2 times a week, then you would suggest maybe even smaller increments. Like, would you say like 15 minute, 15 minute, 15 minute, or do you think smaller increments are just a bad for podcasting? Period, like below 30 minutes, or what do you think about small increment podcasts?
I think anything over 2 parts is going to bore people, right?
Mm,
You want to get them into part 1 and get them out of part 2. And if it's under 30 minutes, then just do the whole thing in one episode, right? So I think
mm,
that's exactly how you want to do it. Now, I will also say that again, if it's all talk, there's a difference
mm,
because all talk podcasts won't last that long for 60 minutes.
mm. Yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
put in the music, put a music in, uh, put in a commercial, even like a 30-second commercial wakes people up. I do that with my
Hmm.
show.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Makes sense. What about because what do you constitute as a podcast, right? So if I'm putting out a 10-minute episode, is that a podcast, or can podcasting, does it have to be long? Because when people think about podcast, think about it only as long form content. But do you think that a 10-minute episode is a podcast, or less than 10-minute episode is a podcast?
Uh, I mean, I've seen podcasts that are 5 minutes long in their episodes, which literally is ridiculous because I mean, I understand it's great. Some people just want to get in and get out and they want to get their quick little content and come out. And that
Mm,
point, I mean, a 5 or 10 minute podcast is great. But again, you have to know what your audience will accept.
mm,
That's the biggest question. If your audience is, let's say, here's a great example. Let's say you're a health podcast and you have
mhm,
a show on working out. Well,
mhm,
most likely, those people who work out are going to take your podcast to the gym, right?
mm,
And at
mhm,
that point, if they're going to work out for an hour, then an episode that's 60 minutes long will work out very well. If I mean sports podcasts, if they're not all talk, they can last 60 minutes
mhm,
because they can always take pieces of the audio from the TV show and put it in. And then you break up a little bit. Like you hear the sportscaster with the audience behind them. You know that whole thing. That does not sound boring because that wakes people up. But if you're going to have all talk, then I would say 15 to 30 minutes should be the most.
mm.
I
Okay.
mean, this is why, like on my episodes, I play music at the end.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I started doing that now too. So
You did? Oh,
yeah,
you
for the
did.
pot's
That's
sake.
good.
Yeah. Yeah. And my final question for you is the future landscape of podcasting in the like how do you see it? Do you see podcasts growing, or do you see it as, the compound annual growth rate sort of decreasing on a year in, year out basis?
I still think it's growing. The pandemic obviously made it grow even faster. Before the pandemic, our podcast network had 200 podcasts. And then within the last 3 years of
Mm,
the almost 4 years of the pandemic now, since that started, we've gotten like 800 new podcasts.
mm,
So people were staying at home, they were working at home, and they were putting their shows on. And now,
mm,
just this whole entire revolution where people are working at home, you got WeWork, right? You got all these different places that you can leave your house and go have your own office. You can work at home.
mhm.
People have podcasts now. So I think it's just going to grow.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Bruce, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you on the internet?
They can look me up on Spotify. I got my
Yeah.
music. They can find me on Facebook. The World Podcast Network also has a Twitter account. I can just give you those links if you want to put them in the
Yes, of course.
notes. And
Absolutely.
really, people can just reach me through the World Podcast Network, which is worldpodcast.network.
Yeah. Awesome, Bruce. Thank you so much for coming on. This concludes another great episode of the Mooncast, man, and peace.